They thought age had made me weak, easy to silence, easy to erase. But hidden in my attic was the kind of truth that doesn't just whisper, it detonates. When the lies finally collapsed, so did their world. And it all began with one envelope in the dark. I sit in my Victorian parlor, surrounded by creaking floors and fading wallpaper, as Sarah's voice slices through the walls. You're selfish, Mother. This house could save our business. Her syllables travel down the staircase like knives thrown from the landing. She doesn't wait for my answer. We have buyers. 2. In fact, people would kill for a property like this. She smiles. It's for your own good. Imagine. No more maintenance. No more stairs. A nice condo near the water. You could walk to everything. Safe. Supervised. Supervised. The word lands like dust on a coffin lid. Mark leans on the banister, casual. Eleanor, be reasonable. This market won't last. You sign now. We invest. Everyone wins. He adds. Lower. Also, your condition. The forgetfulness. Documents get complicated. My condition? I say, keeping my tone even. He exchanges a look with Sarah that is meant to be compassionate. It happens at your age. No shame in it. I let my eyes drift past them to the mantel where my life is boxed into frames. There, a headline. City Hall cleanup after expose. There, a photograph of my husband at Coney Island. Half smile, hair wild with salt air. On the side table lies my press badge, dulled with the years, but still legible. I survived deadlines and threats and city winters. Now, I am to be supervised. It is my house, I say. Not loudly, not meekly. A simple filing of fact. Sarah exhales like I have forced her into rudeness. Mother, we've gone over this. You're having episodes. You forgot your pills twice last week. Mark found them in the bread box. I put them there. I reply, because the kitchen sunlight warms the capsules, and my hands don't ache so much when I take them. I almost smile at their silence. My mind is not a bread box, darling. Her eyes harden. This is exactly what I mean. You make jokes. You deflect. Deflection, yes. It kept me alive in rooms where men wanted me small. But I am not joking. The body is a frayed cable. The current, however, is intact. In the afternoon, when their whispers move upstairs like a second plumbing, I step onto the front porch for air. Mrs. Klein from across the street halts mid-stride when she sees me. She used to bring me lemon squares for the 4th of July. Today, she pulls her cardigan tighter and nods without warmth. Another neighbor, young, in gym clothes, glances at me with a pity that is somehow crueler than contempt. Poor thing, she murmurs to her phone. Poor thing. As if I cannot hear. I reach the gate. A car idles by. From the back seat, a crushed soda can arcs into my garden, nicking the soil with a hollow sound. I hear a laugh. My hand trembles. Not with shock, but with the old itch. The one that says, note this. All of it. Inside, the parlor holds its breath. In the far corner rests my Remington. A bull of a typewriter that once shook these floors with truth. Its ribbon is long dried, but the keys still face upward like teeth. I run a finger over the D, the F, the J with their homing ridges, and a memory rises clean as glass. A night in 2076, neon in the window, the editor pacing, my copy landing hot and precise. There is a part of me that is still that woman, hungry, unafraid, certain the world can be steered by words, if they are accurate enough. But certainty is a lighter now, not a torch. I fold back the lace and slip the press badge into my cardigan pocket. An old superstition. Above me, the attic settles with its familiar groan. Sarah calls it a fire hazard. Mark calls it wasted space. I have called it storage for longer than I can recall. But the word is wrong. It is a vault. really of winters and summers, of tapes that click and whir, of journals with spines like tired birds. Evening, we sit at the long mahogany table, as if we are family in a magazine. Mark pours the wine. Sarah serves me a single spoon of potatoes like a nurse, rationing mercy. She keeps up a cheerful commentary about potential buyers. Comps. Escrow. Mother, Sarah says finally, setting down her fork with precision. I've scheduled a capacity assessment. Standard procedure. It will help everyone. What helpful children, I say, and taste iron where my tongue has nicked itself. You're a burden, she says instead. And the wine glass in her fist slams the table so hard the candle gutters. The sound rings up through the house. The 70s pulsed with ink and adrenaline. The newsroom buzzed, cigarette smoke curling, typewriters hammering, editors pacing with red pencils. A woman with a notebook stood out. A woman refused charm even more than. I wore both as armor. The story sparked with 3 mismatched invoices and whispers of a shady contract overheard in a bar. The bartender's knowing glance guided my pen. I traced the money through shell companies and a construction bid poured in secret. Blurry photos and evasive smiles led to more locked doors. My desk became chaos maps. Pinned notes. A secret file. Labeled after, for when the truth would land. Corruption moved slowly, patient in its seduction. I learned to coax clerks and confronted lawyers. When the exposé hit front page, my byline sharp, the city froze. The mayor's polished denial rang hollow. Subpoenas followed, then arrests. A councilman hides his face, his driver wept. Reform sprouted fast. I slept little, dreaming in fragments. Awards came like winter's chill. In borrowed dresses, I relied on colleagues over the press's roar, believing the truth could shift the world with enough ink. He saw me first at a courthouse, a public defender with a crooked tie and laughing eyes. You ask the right questions, he said. I laughed, saying I asked wrong ones too. Marry me after the right one, he teased. We shared late dinners in diners, my notes beside his case files, arguing over how much we owed the world. Sarah, my daughter, danced through this chaos, cared for by women whose names lined my fridge. I justify my absences, whispering, "This is for your future," as I left before dawn. Guilt struck like a trapped bird when elevator doors closed, but I'd open my notebook and turn to steal. Her 3rd birthday collided with grand jury indicted. I missed the cake with buttercream roses. At home, my husband shaped pancakes into animals. Sarah clapped, wearing a paper crown. I kissed her, whispering, "Happy birthday." The guilt silent, but heavy. Years burned away. Reforms held briefly. New scandals called. The newsroom traded ashtrays for computers, but its hum endures. I stored plaques in a box, wary of pride. Tonight, decades later, I find that yellowed front page, my byline faint. My fingers trace it like a scar, recalling the woman who reshaped a city with words. Does Sarah remember her? Or only the missed cakes and empty chairs? The house creaks, and I tuck the clipping away. Evidence I might still need. By the mid-80s, the house no longer echoed with the wild joy of a little girl chasing shadows. Instead, it carried the sharp percussion of slammed doors and the brittle edge of teenage accusations. Sarah had grown into a tall, watchful pre-teen with a gaze that seemed always to measure and find me wanting. One evening, I returned from a courthouse in Albany, this time, a child welfare investigation that had cracked open like a rotting fruit. I walked in to find her sitting at the kitchen table, arms folded, eyes hard. "You care more about other people's children than your own," she said. No preamble, no greeting, just a verdict, rendered cold. I tried to explain the hearings, the interviews with children who had been passed from one neglectful home to another. But Sarah was unmoved. "You miss my school concerts. You're never there for dinner. But you're there for strangers. Always strangers. Her voice rose. Furious. Wounded. Only this time I was not the champion. I was the accused. In the middle of that investigation, I met Anna. She was 11. Bone thin. With hair that looked as though it had never seen a brush. She sat in the back of the hearing room with a social worker who looked more tired than cruel. Anna spoke softly. But her story was loud enough. Years of hunger. Of being shifted between relatives who barely remembered her birthday. I couldn't put her in my articles, but I could do something else. Quietly, I set up an education fund in her name, arranging tuition and a boarding placement, far from the reach of her neglectful guardians. No one knew. Not my editor. Not even my husband, especially not Sarah. The letters started coming a year later. Careful, polite thank yous in looping handwriting. She never knew my home address. I had arranged for a P.O. box under another name. Each letter I read twice before locking it in the desk drawer in my study, under a sheaf of legal documents. The key I kept on a chain around my neck, alongside my wedding ring. At home, Sarah's temper grew alongside her height. Dinner could turn into a siege at the clink of cutlery. She would arrive late, dump her backpack on the floor, and demand to know if I would even notice if she left. Some nights, she cried silently into her plate. Others, she shouted until the chandelier rattled. My husband, caught between us, would make a joke, or pour another glass of wine. Anything to still the noise. Then, one October morning in 1995, the noise stopped in the most brutal way. He collapsed in the kitchen, coffee still steaming in the mug beside him. The doctors called it a massive heart attack. Grief hollowed the house. Rooms felt too large, air too thin. Sarah, barely in her 20s, moved quickly to fill the space her wedding to Mark announced before the year ended. Mark was smooth, charming in public, but I had interviewed enough polished liars to recognize the varnish. His stories of quick profits and smart deals had too many missing pieces, too many transactions that blurred in the retelling. One evening, by chance, I overheard him on the phone discussing a payment to keep someone quiet. I began keeping notes, dates, overheard fragments, names. Old habits die hard. The attic became my archive. Journals, cassette tapes, photocopies slipped into folders marked in shorthand. Only I understood. When I confronted Sarah gently, she didn't defend him so much as defend her choice. I finally have someone who puts me first, she said. Don't ruin that because you can't stand not being the hero. Her voice trembled, but her eyes were steady. If you have anything, bury it. For me. And so, I did. I carried the folders upstairs one night while they were out, placed them in a trunk behind the travel cases, and shut the lid. The journals and tapes would wait in the dark. Not gone, never gone, just sleeping. I told myself it was love. I told myself she would understand one day. But even then, I felt the gap between us widen. A crevasse bridged only by secrets. Some meant to protect, others meant to survive. They arrived with 2 suitcases and a story. Just until things stabilize, Sarah had said. Her tone a fragile ribbon, meant to tie everything neatly. Mark stood behind her in the doorway, as if this temporary arrangement were a gift to me, rather than a retreat from their own crumbling ventures. At first I believed them. The house, after all, had held strangers before lodgers during lean years, friends in need during strikes and storms. But strangers leave when they can. Family, it seemed, stayed until the walls learned their shape. Within weeks, they had drifted beyond the guest room. The parlor was rearranged, my armchair moved to make way for Mark's leather recliner. Sarah claimed the sunroom for her workspace, boxing up my shelves of first editions without asking. The dining room table became a battlefield of paperwork. Contracts, ledgers, bank statements, mine among them. It's safer if we manage the bills. Mark explained over coffee one morning, as though announcing the weather. You shouldn't stress about these things at your age. I've been paying my own bills for 50 years, I replied. Exactly, Sarah said, her smile clipped. You deserve a rest. We'll handle it. Protection, mother. From scammers. From mistakes. Protection. I had seen that word in the mouths of lobbyists and crime bosses. It never meant what it promised. By spring, Mrs. Klein's lemon squares stopped arriving. Mr. Alvarez, who used to wave from his porch, began turning away before I could greet him. When I passed on my morning walks, conversations seemed to pause, then resume in lowered voices. One afternoon, two women, unaware I stood in the next aisle at the market, whispered about how sad it is. Her mind going like that. I set down the tin of tea I had been holding. Sarah's voice was in their words. A seed she had planted with precision. The first act of outright cruelty came in the summer. I stepped into the garden at dusk to gather herbs and saw it red spray paint scrawled across the shed door in a jagged hand. Crazy old bat. My hands shook. Not with fear, but with the rage of recognition. I had seen this tactic before. Discredit the witness before they can speak. When I showed Sarah, she sighed. Kids fooling around. Don't be so sensitive. Mark didn't even look up from his phone. The heart episode came not long after. I had been weeding the camellias, my knees aching, when a pressure seized my chest. By the time I reached the kitchen, I could barely draw breath. Sarah drove me to the hospital but stayed in the car on her phone for 10 minutes before walking me in. At triage, she told the nurse I tend to overreact. When they admitted me overnight for observation, she left before visiting hours ended, citing an early meeting. I lay in the dim ward listening to the beeps and hums of machines. A stranger's television muttering through the curtain. No one came. No familiar voice in the doorway. No warm hand on the blanket. I thought of the courtrooms I had stood in, facing men with the power to bury me. I remembered the threats, the phone calls, the shadows that once trailed me down empty streets. And yet, this felt worse. Worse because it came from inside my own walls. Worse because the danger wasn't in being destroyed, it was in being erased. The woman who had once been sharp enough to cut through a city's lies was being softened, blurred, rewritten into a figure of pity and ridicule. When they discharged me the next day, I walked alone to the car park. The air was sharp with exhaust and early autumn chill. Sarah was waiting. She didn't ask how I felt. As we pulled into the drive, the house loomed in the evening light. Inside, it was becoming a prison, and yet, in its bones, in the attic's dusty silence, it was still my shield. Something within these walls was waiting for me to remember how to fight. The pandemic made the house feel smaller, its hallways tightening like a noose. Sarah and Mark worked from the dining room now, their voices cutting through the walls as they argued about cash flow and liquidating assets. Every few days, the conversation circled back to me, my age, my inflexibility, the fact that the Victorian could fetch a fortune in this market. You're being selfish, mother, Sarah would shout from the other room. You're sitting on value while we're drowning. Value? I'd answer. It's my home, not a stock you can sell when you're bored. The fights rolled on like weather, sometimes sharp and fast, sometimes slow and suffocating. I learned to retreat to my room, the only place left that felt mine. But even there, their voices leaked under the door, laced with resentment. Then came the heart attack. It happened quietly. The pain was steady, unyielding, as if some unseen hand had reached inside and was squeezing the life out of me. The ambulance ride was a blur of sirens and cold air. In the hospital, the world narrowed to tubes, wires, and the steady beep of a monitor. Sarah came once, late in the afternoon. She sat in the chair by my bed, scrolling through her phone. You have no idea how expensive this is going to be, she said finally. The insurance will only cover so much. Mark's already stressed about the mortgage. I looked at her, searching for some flicker of concern. But her face was an accountant's ledger numbers, in place of empathy. She stayed 10 minutes, then left, citing important calls. When they discharged me, I came home to the same house, but I could feel something different under its skin. My body was weak, but my mind had gone sharp again. I knew I could not fight them with words alone. I needed proof, and I knew exactly where to look. The attic stairs were steeper than I remembered. My legs trembled with each step, my breath catching, but the air up there held a kind of electricity. The boards groaned under my weight, a sound as old as the house itself. I made my way to the far wall where an old trunk sat half hidden beneath a tarp. The lock was stiff, the key exactly where I'd left it years ago, in the lining of an old coat hanging on a hook nearby. When the lid opened, it was like cutting into the past. There were my diaries, leather spines cracked, pages filled with the tight, slanted handwriting I used when recording facts I couldn't yet publish, and the tapes cassettes with my handwriting in black marker, dates and cryptic phrases scrawled on their labels. I chose one at random, slid it into the dusty recorder, and pressed play. Mark's voice filled the attic, younger but unmistakable. I told him it's taken care of. The envelope was delivered. No one's going to talk as long as she keeps her mouth shut. There was a pause, then another voice. Sarah's, my daughter. Good. The last thing we need is her poking around. She doesn't understand how things work anymore. The sound of my own breath in that moment was louder than the tape. My hands shook as I pressed stop. Among the papers, I found a folded note, in Sarah's unmistakable handwriting, lists of figures, initials, and one sentence underlined twice. Keep this between us. For years I had told myself she was simply blind to Mark's flaws, loyal to a fault. But here, in my hands, was the truth. She had been part of it. Willingly. I closed the trunk, but not the door it had opened in me. The weakness in my limbs was still there, but it was no longer the weakness of surrender. It was the temporary frailty of someone who knows she will stand again. I looked around the attic, at the dust floating like constellations, and felt the first solid pulse of resolve I'd had in years. They thought the house was my cage. They had forgotten it was also my archive. And now, it would be my weapon. Finding Anna was easier than I expected. One late night, I sat at my old desk and typed her name into the search bar. There she was, her photograph on a glossy firm's website. Partner. Corporate law. The girl I had once smuggled out of neglect now stood in glass offices, with her own name etched on the door. I dialed the number listed. When her assistant patched me through, my voice wavered only slightly. Anna? It's Eleanor. There was a pause, and then a rush of air, as though she'd been holding her breath for 20 years. Oh my God. Where are you? Are you all right? We met the next afternoon in a quiet cafe far from my neighborhood. When she walked in, I saw the little girl in the set of her shoulders, the way her eyes searched for me. But she moved with the confidence of a woman who had earned her ground inch by inch. She hugged me hard. You saved my life, she said. No preamble, no small talk. I wouldn't be here without you. I told her everything. The isolation, the control, the rumors, the trunk in the attic, and the tape that had shattered what little hope I had left for Sarah. My voice was steady, the way it had been in courtrooms and press briefings, but Anna's eyes burned as she listened. They can't touch you if we play this right, she said finally, leaning forward. We'll set up legal safeguards. Your will, your power of attorney, everything in writing, airtight. And the evidence? I asked. She smiled, the way I must have smiled once, when a case began to crack open. We'll keep it secure. But Eleanor, if you release it, you need to be ready for war. War. I'd fought it before, but never with my own child on the other side. That night, back in my room, I spread the files across the bed, sorting by relevance, by date, by potential impact. My fingers ached. My chest tightened if I bent too long. But I didn't stop. Every hour or so, I slid a completed packet into the hollow beneath the floorboards, covering it with the rug before anyone could see. I thought of past investigations where waiting a single day meant the difference between a resignation and an arrest. You learn to live in that razor's edge, balancing patience against urgency. One morning, I came downstairs to find Mark at the kitchen island, eating toast with the satisfied air. "Still hoarding those old papers upstairs?" he said with a smirk. "You should let Sarah clean them out before they're a fire hazard." I didn't answer. Sarah entered then, carrying my tea. She set it down without looking at me. No sugar. She knew I took it sweet. A small omission, but deliberate. I sipped it anyway, tasting the bitterness on my tongue and in my heart. It was then I decided. The next night, I wrote the covering note in careful block letters, disguising my hand. No names, only dates, facts, and the trail that led directly to Mark's bribes and Sarah's part in concealing them. I placed it all into a large envelope, sealing it with tape. I walked to the post box under a thin moon, sliding that envelope into the dark mouth of the mailbox. I felt a tremor pass through me, half fear, half something like joy. It was an echo of my old life. The rush of knowing the truth was leaving my hands and heading into the world, where it could no longer be buried. Somewhere in the city, a newsroom would soon hear my voice again, though they wouldn't know it was mine. And for the first time in years, I felt the weight of my fear shift into the weight of my weapon. It happened on a Thursday. I woke to the sound of engines outside. Through the lace curtain, I saw news vans lining the curb, their dish antennas tilted toward the sky, like pale flowers searching for light. The paper had run the exposé at dawn. Mark's corruption, the bribes, the contracts awarded in backroom deals, and, woven in with brutal precision, Sarah's role emails, notes, and a tape in her own voice, all confirming what I had known in my bones. By mid-morning, neighbors had begun to gather on their porches. Some whispered openly. Others turned away, as if the sight of me might burn their eyes. The same people who had crossed the street to avoid me now seemed to shrink into their own doorways, as though guilt were contagious. Mark came stomping down the stairs, phone pressed to his ear, his voice a hard rasp. "Don't talk to me about damage control. This is a hit job. It's political." Then, turning toward me, You did this." I didn't answer. He slammed a door upstairs so hard the frame shook. A moment later, there was another sound, 3 sharp knocks. When I opened the front door, 2 police officers stood there with a warrant. Behind them, a detective whose eyes did not move from mine. "We're here for any remaining documents," he said. I stepped aside. The officers moved through the house. From above, Mark's voice rose again, indignant, then broke into a stream of curses. Sarah appeared in the hallway, pale, barefoot, clutching her phone like a talisman. She looked from the officers to me. "They know everything," she whispered, her lips barely moving. "Everything." "Yes," I said. Her eyes searched mine, confusion sharpening into clarity. "It was you." It was not accusation at first, it was shock. Her mouth opened, closed. "You." After everything, I agreed. I remembered who I was. She stared at me as though the woman standing before her was a stranger. The Eleanor she had learned to belittle, to box in, and manage, no longer lived here. The search took an hour. Files, tapes, copies, all catalogued, all carried away. When the last box left the house, I closed the door and leaned against it. That afternoon, Anna arrived. She carried with her a folder of legal documents, her movements brisk, efficient, but her eyes warm. At the dining table, where for years I had sat as a supplicant to my own daughter's judgments, I signed the papers updating my will. The old house would go to Anna. By evening, the news vans had gone. I walked through each room alone. In the parlor, sunlight poured through the stained glass, scattering colors across the floor, as if the house had decided to dress itself in celebration. The air felt lighter, as though some weight had lifted from the very beams. Upstairs, I paused at the attic door, resting my hand on the frame. It was empty now, but it had served its purpose. Standing there, I realized that what I felt was not triumph in the way people imagine, no swell of revenge, no thirst for applause. It was quieter, deeper. Justice isn't about revenge. It's about remembering who you are when others try to erase you. And in that moment, with the last of the day's light falling across my face, I remembered entirely. Looking back, I've learned that the most dangerous theft is not of money or property, it's when someone tries to take your sense of self. For years, I allowed others to define me, to rewrite my story in their version of truth. But life has taught me that silence can be its own betrayal. No matter your age, you have the right and the power to protect what matters. Whether that's your dignity, your memories, or your home. Strength is not in never being broken. It's in knowing you can rebuild yourself, piece by piece. When the world tries to take you apart, we are never too old to reclaim our voice. And sometimes, that's the loudest justice of all. If stories like this speak to you, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. There's more to tell, and more voices to honor.